Today we're going to take a closer look at two semiconductor companies, AMD and Intel. As I am recording today's episode, both stocks are actually close to their 52-week low. AMD is right now sitting at $67 with its 52-week low of $66. Intel is sitting at $26.85 with its 52-week low of $26.62. So in today's episode, I want to take a closer look at the new generation of processors both these companies are releasing. AMD actually just released theirs today, and Intel is planning on releasing theirs within a month. They did release a lot more information today, and I do want to say, unfortunately, even though I am an AMD investor, that Intel might actually have AMD beat this generation, and let me explain why.
I do want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and make sure to check out fool.com/Jose to get the top 10 stocks to buy right now.
So before we go any further, I want to explain how important this kind of consumer CPU market is for both AMD and Intel. We can see for AMD in their most recent financial quarter, or quarter 2 of 2022, client revenue was $2.2 billion. Here's where you see a lot of their consumer processors, and we can see that's roughly 1/3 of total revenue. If we take a closer look at Intel, this most recent quarter they had $7.7 billion in their client computing group. A lot of that comes from consumer processor sales as well, and that $7.7 billion makes up roughly 50% of total revenue for Intel. Again, there's more than just their processors within that segment, but it is a big chunk of total revenue. So that's why the consumer processor market is very, very important both for AMD and Intel. So now let's take a closer look at what both these companies have recently announced. So actually today, on September 27th of 2022, AMD released their new processors for sale. This is going to be the Ryzen 7000 series line, and you can get one for as cheap as $299, which I think is pretty expensive, and as expensive as $700, depending on what kind of performance you want. I do want to backtrack and say for AMD's previous Ryzen generation, the Ryzen 1000, the 2000, the 3000, and the 5000, they have all worked on the same motherboard, which is the AM4 socket. So in theory, if you were to buy the Ryzen 1000 series and you just wanted to buy a new Ryzen 3000 or even the previous generation, the Ryzen 5000, you didn't have to upgrade much. All you had to do was buy a new CPU. Now with this new technology that AMD has created and just the overall innovation of technology, when you are buying the new Ryzen 7000 series, you do have to buy a new motherboard, which is with their new AM5 socket, and you also have to buy new memory, which is the DDR5 memory, where the previous generations used DDR4. So the reason I'm explaining, and for investors, it's obviously important to understand how the consumer market is. Right now, we do know that there are fears of the recession, of consumer spending decreasing. So by creating more, I want to say, hurdles for the consumers to get into a certain product, is probably less likely that consumers are going to buy it. So let's say I wanted to buy the new generations of AMD's processors right now. I would have to either buy the cheapest, which would be $300. Then I would have to buy a new motherboard, which is around $260. And then I would have to buy a new memory. Depending on how much memory, it can be somewhere between $100 and $200. So that's already over $500, maybe even $600 or more, depending on what you buy when you're buying just the new generation of AMD's processor. I do want to say AMD does think in the long term of things. So this new AM5 socket is something that's going to be designed and supported through 2025. So it is going to be a big upfront cost at once, but it is more of like a future proof for at least the next two generations of AMD processors. So normally this is a great move. I do want to say, except right now when the kind of market that we're in, it might actually be a hurdle for a lot of people to kind of enter this new technology. If you are enjoying the episode so far, make sure to hit the thumbs up as it does help me grow my overall audience. If you want to support a little bit more, make sure to hit subscribe using my link at fool.com/Jose. Finally, if you want to learn more about the semiconductor market, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter. The link is down below. Now, if we take a closer look at Intel, I want to explain why Intel might actually beat AMD this generation. And today, September 27, Intel is actually hosting their Intel Innovation, which is just a giant conference where they share a lot of their new products, especially the ones in the consumer space. So today they did release more information on their 13th generation processor on the Raptor Lake. So there are a few things here. First, if you had the previous generation, their 12th generation Alder Lake, you were using a 600 socket on the motherboard. Intel says if you want to use the old socket, you can still use it. But if you want to buy a new socket, you can actually buy a new motherboard that supports the 700 series. Also, Intel says you can buy new DDR5 memory, or it actually supports DDR4. So if you do want to upgrade, for example, it seems like it's a little bit cheaper to upgrade to an Intel processor compared to the Ryzen processor. I do want to say the 600 socket motherboard that Intel has is only for their previous generation, the 12th generation, and usually you don't get many people who upgrade every generation, but since the technology is a little bit older, it might be a little bit cheaper than compared to upgrading to a whole new AMD Ryzen 7000 products, for example. I do want to say it is funny because normally AMD is known to have the cheapest kind of upgrade cost, but in this generation, it does seem like it will be cheaper for Intel and for consumers to upgrade to their new generations. I believe for the next generation of processors, which might be released next year or a year and a half from now, the situation might change. But it does seem like right now, Intel is the one that would save some dollars if you are upgrading to a new kind of processor. Now, this is not a tech channel, so I'm not going to go in depth in their benchmarks, right? I do want to say it does seem like Ryzen's new generation processors are a bit better than Intel's previous generation, and that's to be expected. I do want to say there are scenarios where AMD's processors might be a lot better than Intel's, and there might be certain situations where Intel's processors might be better than AMD's. What I'm trying to say right now is there's no clear winner at the moment. We don't have any benchmarks, obviously, of the next generation of Intel, which is expected to be released on October 20th. So I do want to say right now, even though I am an AMD holder and I am an AMD investor and bullish in the company, it does seem in the processors, there's still strong competition from the likes of Intel. I do want to say, unfortunately, AMD did really well with their last generation, the Ryzen 5800X3D, which was the first processor to have 3D V-Cache technology in it, and it actually continues to do really well in benchmarks. So I do want to say some people that might want to upgrade to better processors, they might not buy the new AMD generation. They might just buy this 5000 series with 3D cache technology that is continuing to perform really well. So I do want to say, unfortunately, right now with the overall macroeconomics and fears of consumer spending decreasing, it might not be the best time for AMD in the consumer side. Again, Intel made it a little bit easier to upgrade for the next generation, but that product is still not out yet. At the end of the day, right now, AMD is definitely one of my favorite semiconductor stocks. They continue to win in the data center market. They're still very competitive in the CPU processors, and they continue to drive new technologies like CPUs, DPUs, GPUs, and the list goes on and on. Intel, on the other hand, is seeing a lot more hits and a lot more headwinds. Obviously, things can turn around, and I have done a video where I take a closer look at 3 reasons why I would stay away from Intel stock, and in the future, I am planning on doing 3 reasons why I actually would buy Intel. So there's always a bullish side and a bearish side. I do believe for Intel, right now it's a little bit more on the bearish side for the stock. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Take care, have a good day, and see you next time.